Part 1. The saloon stank of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed men who'd been riding hard for days. Red Hollow wasn't the kind of place you came to unless you had nowhere else to go. It sat at the edge of civilization, if you could even call it that, where the law was whatever the man with the biggest fist said it was. Coulter Rains pushed through the door just after sundown. 6'4", shoulders like an ox, hands scarred from years of breaking rock, breaking horses, breaking anything that needed breaking. His face was the kind that made people look away, not because it was ugly, but because it was hard. The kind of hard that came from watching things die and learning not to feel it anymore. He didn't say hello, didn't nod at anyone, just walked straight to the bar, slapped down a silver dollar, and waited. The bartender, a wiry man named Hickson, who'd seen every kind of trouble walk through that door, poured him whiskey without asking. Coulter drank it in one pull, set the glass down, and turned to face the room. That's when everything stopped. "I need a wife," Coulter said. His voice was low, rough, like gravel scraping wood. "By sunrise." For a second, nobody moved. Then someone laughed. It was an ugly, mocking sound that spread through the room like a disease. Men slapped tables. A few stood up, grinning, thinking this was some kind of joke. Coulter Rains, the man who lived alone on that godforsaken mountain, who never talked to anyone, who looked like he'd been carved out of the rocks themselves, wanted a wife? "What's the matter, Coulter?" one man called out. "Finally get lonely up there?" Another one whooped. "You want a wife or a pack mule? 'Cause I got a mule that's probably prettier." Laughter exploded again. Coulter didn't smile, didn't flinch. He just stood there waiting for the noise to die down. And when it did, the silence that followed was worse than the laughter. "I got 2 kids," he said. "Found them in the mountains 3 days ago. Parents dead. No one else to take them." The room shifted. "Law says a man alone can't keep orphans. Judge is coming through tomorrow morning. He finds me unmarried. He takes them to the orphanage in Denver." Someone muttered something about how that was probably for the best. Coulter's eyes cut toward the voice like a knife. The man shut up. "I ain't asking for love," Coulter continued. "I ain't asking for pretty. I'm asking for someone willing to stand in front of a preacher and say the words so those kids don't get dragged into a system that'll kill them slower than the cold did their folks." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch, dropped it on the bar. Coins spilled out, gold ones. "That's $200, he said. "More than most of you'll see in a year. It's yours if you marry me tonight." The room went still again. $200 was a fortune. Enough to buy land, enough to start over, enough to make a man, or a woman, think twice about their pride. But no one moved. Because marrying Coulter Rains meant leaving everything behind. It meant going up that mountain to a cabin no one had ever seen. It meant winters that could snap a spine and summers so short you barely had time to breathe before the cold came back. It meant becoming invisible. And nobody in Red Hollow wanted that. Coulter waited. 30 seconds, a minute. Then he picked up the pouch, turned toward the door, and started walking. That's when she stood up. Martha Hale had been sitting in the corner for 2 hours, washing dishes in a basin of water that had long since gone cold. She worked in the saloon's kitchen, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only job in town that didn't require her to be seen. She was a big woman, not just heavy, though she was that too. Big in the way that made people uncomfortable. Big in a world that demanded women be small, quiet, decorative. Her arms were thick from years of lifting cast iron pots. Her face was plain, unmemorable. Her hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it gave her headaches, but she didn't dare loosen it. Loose hair meant attention, and attention meant cruelty. She'd learned that early. In Red Hollow, women like Martha didn't get courted. They didn't get flowers or sweet words or second glances. They got work. They got silence. And if they were lucky, they got left alone. But tonight, something cracked inside her. Maybe it was the way Coulter had stood there, desperate and honest, while men who weren't half the man he was laughed in his face. Maybe it was the thought of those 2 kids, faceless, nameless, but real, being dragged away to some orphanage where they'd be worked to death or worse. Maybe it was the fact that Martha Hale was 37 years old and had spent every single day of her life being told she wasn't enough. She didn't know. But she stood up anyway. The basin clattered against the table. Water sloshed onto the floor. Every head in the room turned toward her. Martha felt her face go hot, felt her hands start to shake, felt the weight of every eye pressing down on her like stones. But she didn't sit back down. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she wanted, barely loud enough to hear. Coulter stopped, turned. His eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment neither of them moved. Someone laughed. "Hell, Coulter, I said you needed a mule, not that you should marry one." More laughter. Martha's stomach twisted. She wanted to sit down, wanted to disappear, wanted to take it back. But then Coulter spoke. "Shut your mouth, Benson." The laughter stopped. Coulter crossed the room in 5 long strides. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her, so close she could smell leather and wood smoke and something sharper, fear maybe, desperation. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. "You sure?" he asked. Martha swallowed hard. "No." A flicker of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. "Fair enough," he said. "You got any conditions?" She hadn't thought that far. Hadn't thought past standing up. But now that he was asking, one question rose to the surface. The only one that mattered. "Will you be kind?" she asked. Coulter blinked, like he'd never been asked that before, like he didn't know what to do with the question. "I ain't cruel," he said slowly, "if that's what you're asking. That's not what I asked." He frowned, looked away, looked back. "I'll try," he said. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even close to what she wanted, but it was honest. And for Martha Hale, honesty was more than she'd ever gotten from anyone. "All right," she said, "then I'll marry you." But they didn't wait. Coulter found the preacher, a half-drunk man named Woolsey, who doubled as the town's undertaker, and dragged him to the church. Martha followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. The church was small, cold. The candles barely gave enough light to see by. Woolsey mumbled through the vows like he was reading a grocery list. Coulter repeated them in that low, flat voice of his. Martha's voice shook so badly she had to say, "I do," twice before Woolsey heard her. There was no ring, no kiss, no celebration. Just 2 people standing in front of a man who smelled like bourbon, signing a paper that said they were legally bound. When it was over, Coulter handed Woolsey $10 and turned to Martha. "We leave at first light," he said. "Pack what you need. Don't pack what you don't." Then he walked out. Martha stood there alone in the empty church, staring at the paper in her hands. Mrs. Coulter Raines. She didn't feel any different, didn't feel married, didn't feel anything except terrified. She didn't sleep that night. There wasn't much to pack, a change of clothes, a hairbrush, a small wooden box that held the only photograph she owned. Her mother, dead 15 years now, standing in front of a house Martha barely remembered. She left the box behind. Whatever was waiting for her on that mountain, the past wasn't going to help. Coulter came for her just as the sun started crawling over the horizon. He had a wagon hitched to 2 horses and a tarp tied over the back. Martha climbed up onto the seat without a word. That's when she saw them. The kids. They were huddled in the back of the wagon, half hidden under blankets. The boy, Eli, was maybe 14, all elbows and sharp eyes. He stared at Martha like she was something dangerous. The girl, Rose, was smaller, maybe 9 or 10, with tangled dark hair and a face so pale it looked like she hadn't seen the sun in months. Neither of them said anything. "This is Martha," Coulter said, climbing up beside her. She's gonna help." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Help with what?" "Living," Coulter said flatly. Then he snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. The ride up the mountain took 6 hours. 6 hours of silence, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the occasional cough from Rose. The road, if you could even call it that, was barely wide enough for the wagon. On one side, the mountain rose straight up, jagged and unforgiving. On the other side, it dropped into nothing. Martha gripped the edge of the seat so hard her knuckles went white. She'd never been this high before. Never been this far from town. Never been anywhere, really. And now she was riding into the wilderness with a man she didn't know, 2 kids who looked at her like she was the enemy and no idea what she'd just signed up for. "You scared of heights?" Coulter asked. Martha didn't answer right away. Then, yeah, don't look down. That's not helpful. Wasn't trying to be helpful, was trying to keep you from falling off the wagon. Despite everything, Martha almost smiled. Almost. The cabin appeared just as the sun started to sink behind the peaks. It was smaller than she'd expected. Rougher. Just one room, with a stone chimney on one side and a lean-to stable on the other. The wood was dark, weathered, splitting in places. The roof sagged in the middle, but it was solid. And it was theirs. Coulter pulled the wagon to a stop, climbed down, and started unloading supplies without a word. Eli jumped down and helped. Rose stayed in the back, watching Martha with those big, unblinking eyes. Martha climbed down slowly, her legs stiff from the ride. She looked around. The mountains surrounded them on all sides, massive and indifferent. The air was thinner here, colder. The trees were twisted, gnarled things that looked like they'd been fighting the wind for 100 years. There was no sound except the wind. No neighbors. No town. No way out except the road they'd just come up. Martha felt her chest tighten. "You coming inside or you planning to freeze out here?" Coulter called from the door. She followed him in. I sent. The inside of the cabin was just as rough as the outside. One big room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed shoved against the far wall. A ladder led up to a loft where the kids slept. There were shelves, but they were mostly empty. A few pots hung from nails. The floor was dirt, packed hard from years of boots. It smelled like smoke and old leather and something faintly sour. "It ain't much," Coulter said, dropping a sack of flour onto the table. "But it keeps the wind out." Martha didn't know what to say. Eli brushed past her, carrying a bundle of firewood. Rose climbed down from the wagon and stood in the doorway, still watching. "You sleep up there," Coulter said, nodding toward the loft. "With Rose." Martha blinked. "What about... I'll sleep down here." "But I said I'd be kind," Coulter said, his voice flat. "Didn't say I'd be stupid. You don't know me. I don't know you. We'll figure the rest out later." He turned away before she could respond. Martha climbed the ladder slowly, her legs shaking. The loft was even smaller than the room below, just enough space for 2 bedrolls and a crate that held a few blankets. Rose was already up there, curled into a ball in the corner. "Hi," Martha said softly. Rose didn't answer. Martha sat down on the other bedroll and pulled a blanket over her shoulders. Below she could hear Coulter moving around, building a fire, talking to Eli in low, clipped sentences. She closed her eyes and wondered what the hell she'd just done. The first week was hell. Not because Coulter was cruel. He wasn't. He barely spoke to her at all. Just woke up before dawn, worked until dark, and collapsed into his bedroll without a word. Not because the kids hated her, though Eli came close. He didn't talk to her, didn't look at her, just did his chores and disappeared into the woods whenever he got the chance. Rose was different. Rose didn't talk to anyone. She moved through this cabin like a ghost, silent and careful. Like she was afraid that if she made too much noise, someone would notice her and make her leave. No, the hell came from the mountain itself. Martha had never worked like this before, never chopped wood until her hands bled, never hauled water up from the creek until her back screamed, never cooked over a fire that either burned too hot or not hot enough, never in between. She burned the first 3 meals she made. Coulter ate them anyway. Eli didn't. On the 4th night, Martha tried to make biscuits. She'd made biscuits 1,000 times back in town. But the altitude was different here. The air was thinner. The dough didn't rise the way it was supposed to. They came out hard as rocks. Eli picked one up, looked at it, and tossed it out the door. "Eli," Coulter said quietly. "What? I ain't eating that." "You'll eat what you're given." "I ain't eating rocks." Coulter's jaw tightened. "You'll eat, or you'll go to bed hungry." "Fine." Eli stood up, shoved his chair back, and climbed the ladder to the loft. Martha sat there, staring at the biscuits, feeling her face burn. "They're bad," she said quietly. "He's right." Coulter picked one up, bit into it, chewed slowly. "They're fine," he said. "You don't have to lie." "I ain't lying. They're food. That's all they need to be." He took another bite. Martha felt something crack inside her chest. Not quite gratitude. Not quite relief. Just something. "Thank you," she whispered. Coulter didn't answer. 2 weeks in, Rose spoke for the first time. Martha was mending a shirt by the fire when she heard it, soft, barely louder than the crackling wood. "Why'd you come here?" Martha looked up. Rose was sitting on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the flames. Martha didn't know how to answer that. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." "Neither did we." Martha set the shirt down. "What happened to your parents?" Rose didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat, empty. "Mama got sick, real sick. Papa tried to get her down the mountain, but the snow came early. He didn't make it back." Martha's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Sorry doesn't fix anything." She said it the way a child shouldn't, like she'd already learned that the world didn't care about sorry. Martha wanted to say something, wanted to promise that things would get better, that she'd take care of her, that everything would be okay. But she didn't, because she didn't know if any of that was true. Instead, she just said, "You're safe here." Rose looked at her for the first time, really looked at her. "Are you?" she asked. Martha didn't have an answer for that either. A month in, the first snow came. Not the soft, pretty kind that people wrote poems about, the kind that buried everything, the kind that killed. It started in the middle of the night, a low howl that woke Martha from a restless sleep. She climbed down the ladder carefully, trying not to wake Rose. Coulter was already up, standing by the window, staring out into the dark. "How bad?" Martha asked. "Bad enough." He didn't elaborate. By morning, the snow was waist-deep and still falling. Coulter and Eli spent the day digging out the stable, making sure the horses didn't freeze. Martha kept the fire going, rationing the wood, trying to make it last. Rose sat by the window, watching the snow pile higher and higher. "It's pretty," she said quietly. "It's deadly," Eli shot back. "Stop looking at it like it's a damn fairy tale." "Eli," Coulter warned. "What?" "It's true. Snow like this kills people. Killed Mama and Papa. Could kill us too if we're not careful." Rose flinched. Martha felt her hands curl into fists. "That's enough." Eli turned to her, his eyes hard. "You don't get to tell me what's enough." "I'm not telling you. I'm asking. You ain't my mother. I know that." "Then stop acting like you are." He shoved past her, climbed the ladder, and disappeared into the loft. Coulter sighed, rubbed his face. "He's scared." "I know," Martha said. "Anger's easier than scared." "I know that too." Coulter looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and went back outside. Martha stood there, listening to the wind scream against the walls, and wondered how long any of them were going to last. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind was too loud, the cabin too cold, her thoughts too sharp. She climbed down from the loft and sat by the fire, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. A few minutes later, Coulter sat down across from her. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Never could. Not when the wind's like this." They sat in silence for a while. Then Martha asked the question she'd been holding on to for weeks. "Why'd you take them in?" Coulter didn't answer right away. He stared at the fire, his face hard and unreadable. "Because nobody took me in," he said finally. "When I was a kid, my folks died and I got passed around to people who didn't want me. Worked me like a dog, fed me scraps, told me I should be grateful." He paused. "I ain't letting that happen to them." Martha felt something shift inside her. "You're a good man, Coulter Raines." He shook his head. "I ain't good. I'm just trying." "That's more than most people do." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. "You didn't have to come here," he said. "You could have stayed in town, could have had an easier life." Martha laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Easier? You think my life in town was easy?" "Easier than this." "Maybe, but it wasn't a life. It was just waiting to die." Coulter frowned. "And this is better?" Martha thought about it. Thought about the cold, the work, the fear. Thought about Eli's anger and Rose's silence and the mountain that wanted them dead. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but at least I'm doing something." Coulter nodded slowly, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Martha felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. "What?" The snow didn't stop for 3 days. By the time it finally did, they were running low on firewood and completely out of fresh meat. Coulter took his rifle and headed into the woods with Eli, leaving Martha and Rose alone in the cabin. "What if they don't come back?" Rose asked, staring at the door. "They'll come back," Martha said. "How do you know?" "Because they have to." It wasn't a good answer, but it was the only one she had. They came back 2 hours later, half frozen and empty-handed. "Nothing out there," Coulter said, shaking snow off his coat. "Animals are smart enough to stay hidden." That night they ate beans and stale bread. Nobody complained. The second month was worse than the first. The cold settled in like a living thing, vicious and unrelenting. The cabin creaked under the weight of the snow. The fire ate through wood faster than they could chop it, and the food was running out. Coulter started rationing, half portions, then quarter portions. Eli got angry again. Accused Coulter of keeping extra for himself. Coulter didn't defend himself, just kept dividing the food equally and eating his share in silence. Martha watched it all and felt helpless. She wasn't built for this world. Wasn't strong enough, fast enough, tough enough. Every day was a fight just to keep moving. Her hands were raw. Her back ached constantly. She'd lost weight, not enough to matter, but enough to notice. And yet, she kept going, because what else was there to do? One night, she found Rose crying in the loft. "What's wrong?" Martha whispered, climbing up beside her. "I miss them," Rose said, her voice breaking. "I miss Mama. I miss Papa. I miss everything." Martha pulled her close, and Rose didn't pull away. "I know," Martha said. "I know." "Does it get easier?" Martha thought about her own mother, thought about the years she'd spent trying to forget the pain of losing her. "No," she said honestly, "but you get stronger." Rose cried harder, and Martha held her until she fell asleep. By the end of the second month, something had shifted. Eli stopped avoiding her, didn't talk to her much, but he stopped looking at her like she was the enemy. Rose started helping with the cooking, didn't say much, but she was there. And Coulter started watching her, not in a bad way, just noticing. Noticing when she stayed up late to mend his torn coat. Noticing when she gave Rose her portion of bread because the girl looked too thin. Noticing when she stumbled coming down the ladder and caught herself without asking for help. One night, he stopped her as she was heading up to the loft. "You're tougher than you look," he said. Martha laughed. "I'd have to be." "I mean it." She looked at him, surprised. "Most people would have run by now," Coulter continued. "Would have given up, gone back down the mountain. There's nothing down there for me. There's nothing up here either." "Yes, there is." She said it without thinking, but once it was out, she realized it was true. There was something here. Not love, not yet, but something. Coulter nodded slowly. "Get some sleep, Martha." "You too, Coulter." She climbed the ladder, and for the first time in weeks, she fell asleep without crying. The third month brought a thaw. Not a full thaw, just enough to make the world slightly less murderous. The snow pulled back from the door. The sun came out for a few hours each day. The creek started running again. Coulter and Eli went hunting. This time, they came back with a deer. It wasn't much, barely enough to last a week, but it was something. That night, they had fresh meat for the first time in months. Eli actually smiled. Rose ate until she was full. And Martha felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It didn't last long. Hope never did. But for one night, it was enough. The thaw lasted exactly 9 days. Then the mountain reminded them who was in charge. It started with the wind. Not the howling kind that announced itself. The quiet kind that slipped through cracks in the walls and made the candle flames dance sideways. Martha woke to it in the middle of the night, her breath visible in the air above her face. Rose was shivering beside her, curled so tight her knees were pressed against her chest. Martha pulled both blankets over the girl and climbed down the ladder. The fire had died to embers. Coulter was already awake, feeding it small pieces of kindling, trying to coax it back to life without wasting wood they didn't have. "Getting colder," he said without looking up. "I noticed." "Gonna get worse before it gets better." Martha wrapped her arms around herself. "How much worse?" Coulter didn't answer right away. He just kept feeding the fire, his face hard in the orange light. "Bad enough," he said finally. That was becoming his answer for everything. Bad enough. Like if he didn't say the actual words, maybe it wouldn't be as bad as he knew it was going to be. Martha sat down across from him. We're running low on everything, aren't we? Yeah. How low? Low enough that I'm going to have to make a run down to Red Hollow in the next week or two. Can we wait that long? Coulter looked at her then, really looked at her. And Martha saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not the quick, sharp kind, the slow kind, the kind that ate at you day after day until there was nothing left but the waiting. We'll have to, he said. Martha wanted to ask more, wanted to know what happened if the snow came back before he could make it down the mountain, wanted to know what happened if he didn't make it back at all. But she didn't, because she already knew the answer. They'd die up here. All of them. Slow and cold and alone. Get some sleep, Coulter said, turning back to the fire. Gonna need your strength tomorrow. Martha climbed back up to the loft, but she didn't sleep. She just lay there in the dark, listening to Rose's shallow breathing and wondering how much longer any of them had. The next morning, Eli didn't come down for breakfast. Martha climbed the ladder and found him curled up in his bedroll, his face flushed and sweating despite the cold. Eli? She said softly. He didn't respond. She reached out and touched his forehead. He was burning up. Coulter, she called down. Something's wrong. Coulter was up the ladder in seconds. He knelt beside Eli, pressed his hand to the boy's face, then pulled back the blanket. Eli's shirt was soaked through with sweat. Fever, Coulter said quietly. How bad? Bad. There was that word again. What do we do? Martha asked. Coulter stood up, his jaw tight. Keep him warm. Get fluids in him. Wait it out. That's it? That's all there is. Martha felt panic rising in her chest. There has to be something else, medicine or… There's nothing, Coulter cut her off. No doctor, no medicine, nothing but time and luck, and we're short on both. He climbed back down the ladder, leaving Martha alone with Eli. The boy's eyes fluttered open. Mama? He whispered. Martha's throat tightened. No, honey, it's Martha. Eli's face twisted. Where's Mama? She's not here. I want Mama. I know. Eli started crying, not the angry kind, the broken kind, the kind that came from somewhere deep and terrible. Martha didn't know what to do, didn't know what to say, so she just sat down beside him and held his hand while he burned. Rose appeared at the top of the ladder a few minutes later, her face pale. Is he dying? She asked. No, Martha said firmly. He's sick, but he's not dying. Mama got sick like this. This isn't the same. How do you know? Martha didn't, but she looked Rose in the eye and lied anyway. Because I won't let it be. Rose stared at her for a long moment. Then she climbed into her bedroll and pulled the blanket over her head. Eli's fever didn't break for 3 days. 3 days of burning skin and incoherent mumbling. 3 days of Martha forcing water between his cracked lips and wiping sweat from his face. 3 days of watching him waste away while she felt completely useless. Coulter handled it the way he handled everything, by working. He chopped wood until his hands bled, hauled water until his back gave out. Did anything that kept him from sitting still and thinking about what would happen if Eli didn't make it. Rose stopped talking again, just sat in the corner, staring at nothing, like she was already preparing herself for another funeral. On the third night, Martha couldn't take it anymore. She climbed down from the loft and found Coulter sitting by the fire, his head in his hands. He's gonna die, Coulter said. Not a question. A statement. No, he's not. You don't know that. Neither do you. Coulter looked up at her, and Martha saw something crack behind his eyes. I can't lose him, Martha. I can't lose another one. Martha sat down beside him. Another one? Coulter stared at the fire. I had a brother, long time ago, younger than me. Got sick one winter when we were kids. Fever, just like Eli's. I tried everything. Kept him warm, got him water, prayed to every god I could think of. He paused. Didn't matter. He died anyway. Martha felt her chest tighten. Coulter, I ain't good at this, he said, his voice rough. Ain't good at caring about people. Every time I do, they leave. Die or run or just… disappear. And I tell myself it don't matter. Tell myself I'm better off alone. But then I see those kids and His voice broke. Martha reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, scarred, but it was warm. "You're not alone," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Coulter looked at her hand in his like he didn't know what to do with it. "You don't even know me," he said. "I know enough." You don't. You don't know what I've done. The things I don't care." Coulter blinked. "What?" "I don't care what you did before I got here," Martha said. "I care what you're doing now, and right now you're trying to save those kids. That's enough." Coulter stared at her for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand and let go. "Thank you," he said quietly. Martha nodded and climbed back up to the loft. Eli was still burning, but for the first time in days, Martha felt like maybe they had a chance. The fever broke just before dawn. Martha woke to Eli's voice, weak but clear. "I'm hungry," she nearly cried. Instead, she climbed down the ladder, heated up the last of the venison broth, and brought it up to him. He drank it slowly, his hands shaking, but he kept it down. Coulter stood at the bottom of the ladder, watching. When Martha came back down, he didn't say anything, just nodded once and went outside. But that night, when he came back in, he brought her something. A rabbit, small, skinny, barely worth the bullet he'd used to kill it. But it was meat. "For Eli," he said, handing it to her. "And Rose. They need it more than we do." Martha looked at the rabbit, then at Coulter. "What about you?" "I'll manage." "Coulter? Just cook the damn rabbit, Martha." She did. And that night, for the first time in days, all four of them ate together. Eli was still weak. Rose was still quiet. Coulter was still hard. But they were alive. And that was something. 2 weeks after Eli's fever broke, the real cold hit. Not the kind that made you shiver. The kind that made you stop feeling anything at all. The kind that froze spit before it hit the ground and turned your breath into ice crystals in the air. The cabin held, but barely. The wind screamed through every crack. The fire couldn't keep up. They huddled together at night, all four of them, just to stay warm. Martha had never been this cold in her life. Her fingers turned white, her lips cracked and bled. Her lungs burned every time she took a breath. But she didn't complain. Because complaining wouldn't change anything. One morning, Coulter woke them before dawn. "We're out of firewood," he said. Eli sat up, rubbing his eyes. "All of it?" "Enough that we need more. Now." "I'll come with you," Eli said. "No, you're still weak." "I'm fine." "You're not." "I can help you." I said no. Eli's face went hard. "I ain't a kid anymore, Coulter. Stop treating me like one." Coulter's jaw tightened. "You're 14. "So, you think being 14 means I can't pull my weight?" "I think being 14 means you don't get to make stupid decisions that'll get you killed." "And you do?" The two of them stared at each other, and Martha could see it, the thing neither of them would say out loud. They were scared. Both of them. Scared of the cold, scared of the mountain, scared of losing each other. "I'll go," Martha said. Both of them turned to look at her. "What?" Coulter said. "I'll go with you. Eli can stay here with Rose." "You can't chop wood." "Then I'll carry it." "Martha." "I'm going," she said firmly. "You need help, and I'm here, so I'm going." Coulter looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just nodded. They left an hour later. The snow was deep, deeper than Martha had ever seen. Every step was a fight. Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed. But she kept moving. Coulter didn't talk, just led the way through the trees, his axe over his shoulder, his breath coming out in short, sharp bursts. They reached a stand of dead pines about a mile from the cabin. Coulter set down the axe and started marking trees. "These ones," he said, pointing. "Dead wood burns hotter." Martha nodded. Coulter swung the axe. The sound echoed through the forest, sharp, clean, final. He worked fast, felling 3 trees in less than an hour. Then he started cutting them into sections. Martha's job was to haul the pieces back to a central pile. It wasn't complicated, but it was brutal. Each log weighed more than she expected. Her hands were numb. Her back screamed. But she didn't stop. Coulter noticed. "You can rest," he said after the 10th trip. "I'm fine." You're not. I'm fine, she repeated more firmly this time. Coulter stared at her for a moment. Then he went back to chopping. They worked for 3 hours. By the time they were done, Martha could barely stand. Her arms felt like they were going to fall off. Her legs shook with every step. But they had enough wood to last another week, maybe 2 if they rationed. Coulter loaded the logs onto a makeshift sled and started dragging it back toward the cabin. Martha followed, her feet numb, her breath ragged. Halfway back, she stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Coulter stopped, turned around. You need to rest. I'm fine. Martha, I said I'm fine. He grabbed her arm, not rough, but firm. Sit down. We need to get back. Sit down. Martha sat. Coulter knelt in front of her and pulled off her gloves. Her hands were red, raw, bleeding in places. Jesus, he muttered. It's not that bad. It's bad enough. He pulled a strip of cloth from his coat and wrapped it around her hands. His movements were clumsy, unpracticed, but gentle. You should have said something, he said quietly. Would it have changed anything? No, but I would have... He stopped, looked away. I don't know. Martha watched him work, and something inside her shifted. This man, this hard, silent, impossible man, was trying to care, trying to be kind. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was real. When he finished wrapping her hands, he looked up at her. Why'd you come out here? He asked. Really? Martha thought about it, thought about all the reasons she'd told herself. The money, the kids, the escape. But when she answered, she told him the truth. Because no one ever needed me before, she said quietly, and I was tired of being useless. Coulter's face softened, just a little. You're not useless, Martha. I was, back in town. I was just there, taking up space, waiting to die. And now? Now I'm still taking up space, but at least I'm doing something with it. Coulter nodded slowly. Then he stood up and held out his hand. Martha took it. He pulled her to her feet, and they walked back to the cabin together. That night, Eli apologized. Not to Coulter, to Martha. I shouldn't have been an ass earlier, he said, not quite looking at her. About the wood and all. Martha blinked. It's all right. It's not. You went out there and you didn't have to, so thanks. It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything. Martha felt her throat tighten. You're welcome. Eli nodded and climbed up to the loft. Rose tugged on Martha's sleeve. You're bleeding, she said quietly, pointing at Martha's wrapped hands. Just a little. Does it hurt? Not much. Rose looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she reached up and hugged Martha. It was quick, awkward, like she didn't quite remember how, but it was real. When she pulled away, her eyes were wet. Thank you for not leaving, Rose whispered. Martha's chest cracked wide open. I won't. Promise? Martha wanted to promise that she'd stay forever, that she'd protect them, that everything would be okay. But she couldn't, because she didn't know if any of that was true. So instead, she said, I'll try. And Rose nodded like that was enough. The next week, Coulter started teaching Martha how to shoot. You need to know, he said, handing her the rifle, in case something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that. He was right. She didn't. The rifle was heavier than she expected, cold, unforgiving. Hold it like this, Coulter said, adjusting her grip. Butt against your shoulder, tight, or the recoil will knock you on your ass. Martha tried, failed, tried again. Now aim. She squinted down the barrel at the tree Coulter had marked 50 feet away. Breathe out slow, squeeze the trigger, don't pull. She squeezed. The rifle kicked hard. The shot went wide, splintering bark 3 feet to the left of the mark. Again, Coulter said. She tried again, and again, and again. By the end of the day, her shoulder was bruised purple, and she still hadn't hit the tree. I'm terrible at this, she said, handing the rifle back. You're learning. That's different. I don't think I'll ever be good at it. Don't have to be good. Just have to be good enough. Martha looked at him. Good enough for what? Staying alive. He said it so simply, like it was just another fact, like the sky being blue or the snow being cold. But Martha heard what he wasn't saying. He was preparing her for the day he wasn't there. That night, Martha couldn't sleep again. She lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling, listening to Rose's soft breathing beside her. She thought about Red Hollow, thought about the saloon kitchen, thought about the life she'd left behind. It hadn't been much of a life, but it had been safe, predictable. This thing she was living now was none of those things. It was hard and cold and terrifying, but it was hers. For the first time in her life, she was choosing something, not just letting life happen to her, actually choosing. And that had to count for something, didn't it? 2 days later, the food ran out. Not completely. They still had flour, beans, a little salt. But the meat was gone. The vegetables were gone. The eggs were gone. They were down to the kind of meals that kept you alive but didn't fill you up. Coulter tried to hunt, but the animals had disappeared, gone deeper into the mountains or just died off. It didn't matter which. The result was the same. They were starving, slowly. Eli stopped complaining about the food, just ate what he was given and went back to staring at the fire. Rose got quieter, smaller, like she was trying to take up less space. Coulter's face got harder. And Martha tried to hold them together. She rationed the flour, made bread that was more air than substance, stretched the beans until they were practically water. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. But it was all she had. One night she caught Coulter giving his portion to Eli. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's growing, needs it more. You need it too. I'll manage." "Coulter, drop it, Martha." But she didn't. That night, after everyone was asleep, she snuck down to the loft and divided her portion in half, put half back in the pot for Coulter. The next morning, he didn't say anything, but he ate it, and that was enough. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Martha didn't know it was a Tuesday, didn't know what day it was at all. Time had stopped meaning anything up here, but she'd always remember it as the day everything changed. Coulter woke them before dawn. "I'm going down the mountain." Eli sat up. "Now?" "Now." "But the snow, I know." "You'll never make it." "I have to try." Martha climbed down the ladder, her heart pounding. "How long will you be gone?" 3 days, maybe 4. "And if you're not back in 4? Coulter didn't answer. He didn't have to. "I'm coming with you," Eli said. "No." "Coulter, someone needs to stay here. Watch the cabin. Watch Rose. Watch Martha. Martha can... I need you here, Eli." The way he said it, quiet, firm, final, made Eli stop arguing. Coulter turned to Martha. "There's enough wood for a week if you're careful. Rifles loaded. You remember what I taught you?" "Yes?" "Good. Don't open the door for anyone. Don't let the fire go out. And if I'm not back in 5 days, you'll be back." "If I'm not," Coulter continued, "take the kids and head down the mountain. Don't wait for me." Martha felt her chest tighten. "Coulter, promise me, Martha." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being dramatic, wanted to believe he'd be back in 3 days with food and supplies and everything would be fine. But she couldn't. So she just nodded. "I promise." Coulter grabbed his pack, his rifle, and his coat. Then he walked out the door, and Martha watched him disappear into the snow, wondering if she'd ever see him again. The first day without Coulter felt like a year. Martha kept herself busy, fed the fire, checked the wood supply, melted snow for water, made thin soup from beans that had been thin soup the day before. Eli paced, back and forth across the cabin like a caged animal, his eyes flicking to the door every few minutes like Coulter might walk back through it. "He's fine," Martha said, more to herself than to Eli. "You don't know that." "Neither do you." Eli stopped pacing, looked at her. "What if he doesn't come back?" "He will." "But what if he doesn't?" Martha set down the pot she'd been stirring. "Then we'll figure it out." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we will." Eli stared at her like he was trying to decide if she was lying or just stupid. Then he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Martha asked. "Out." "Coulter said..." "I don't care what Coulter said. I can't just sit here." Eli. But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. Rose looked up from where she'd been sitting in the corner, her eyes wide. Is he coming back? Yes, Martha said. He needs air. What if he gets lost? Won't. What if... Rose. Martha knelt down beside her. Be fine. Eli knows these woods. He's been out there dozens of times with Coulter. Rose didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. Martha pulled her close and held her until the shaking stopped. Eli came back 2 hours later, his face red from the cold, carrying an armload of pine branches. For the fire, he said, dropping them by the hearth. They don't burn as good as the logs, but they'll help stretch what we got. Martha stared at him. That's smart. Eli shrugged, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. Coulter showed me once. Said you got to use everything the mountain gives you, 'cause it don't give much. He sat down by the fire, and for the first time since Coulter left, the cabin felt a little less empty. That night, the temperature dropped so low, the water in the bucket froze solid. Martha woke to the sound of Rose's teeth chattering. She pulled both blankets over the girl and climbed down to stoke the fire. Eli was already awake, feeding pine branches into the flames. Can't sleep? Martha asked. Too cold. She sat down beside him. You worried about Coulter? Eli didn't answer right away. He just stared at the fire, his jaw tight. He's tough, he said finally. Toughest man I ever met. If anyone can make it down that mountain, it's him. But the mountain don't care how tough you are. Martha felt her chest tighten. He'll make it. You keep saying that. Because it's true. You don't know that. No, Martha admitted. I don't. But I choose to believe it anyway. Eli looked at her, and something in his face softened. Why? Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm not ready to do that yet. Eli nodded slowly. Then he leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Me neither, he said quietly. The second day was worse. The cold was relentless. The fire couldn't keep up no matter how much wood they fed it. The cabin creaked and groaned under the weight of the ice forming on the roof. And the food... There was almost nothing left. Martha made porridge from the last of the flour, stretching it so thin it was barely more than hot water. She gave most of her portion to Rose, who was looking thinner every day. Eli noticed. You need to eat, he said. I'm fine. You're not. Eli, don't pull that crap with me, Martha. You think I don't see what you're doing? Giving your food to Rose, staying up all night keeping the fire going. You're running yourself into the ground. Someone has to. Yeah, but you can't do it alone. Martha looked at him, surprised. Eli's face was hard, but his eyes were honest. Let me help. You are helping. I mean, really help. Not just chopping wood and pretending I'm fine. I can keep watch tonight. You sleep. I can't. You can. And you will. There was something in his voice, something that reminded her of Coulter. Firm, final. Not mean, just sure. Martha nodded. All right. That night, Eli kept watch while Martha slept. It was the first real sleep she'd had in days. And when she woke, the fire was still burning, and Eli was asleep in the chair, his head tilted back against the wall. She covered him with a blanket and took over the watch. The third day, the storm hit. Not the kind of storm that gave you warning, the kind that showed up like a fist to the face and didn't let up. The wind howled so loud it drowned out everything else. Snow piled up against the door so fast Martha had to dig it out every few hours just to keep it from freezing shut. And Coulter was out there somewhere, alone, in this. Martha tried not to think about it, tried to focus on keeping the cabin warm, keeping the kids fed, keeping herself together, but the fear sat in her chest like a stone. He's not coming back, is he? Rose asked quietly. They were huddled together in the loft, listening to the wind tear at the walls. Yes, he is, Martha said. You don't know that. I do. How? Martha didn't have a good answer for that. Didn't have anything except a feeling that maybe, just maybe, Coulter Raines was too stubborn to die. Because he promised, she said. It was a lie. Coulter hadn't promised anything, but Rose needed to hear it, so Martha said it anyway. Rose pressed closer to her. I don't want to lose him too. Martha's throat tightened. You won't. Everyone leaves. Not everyone. Mama and Papa left. They didn't leave. They died. That's different. Is it? Martha didn't know how to answer that, so she just held Rose tighter and listened to the storm try to kill them. On the fourth day, Eli found the wolf tracks. He'd gone out to check the stable, make sure the horses hadn't frozen, and came back white-faced. "There's something out there," he said. Martha looked up from the fire. "What kind of something?" "Big. 4 legs. Tracks are fresh." "Wolf?" "Maybe. Or a cat. Hard to tell with the snow." Martha's stomach dropped. "How close?" 30 feet from the cabin." "Too close. Way too close." "Did you see it?" she asked. "No, but it's watching. I could feel it." Martha stood up and grabbed the rifle, checked to make sure it was loaded. It was. "Stay inside," she told Rose. "Don't open the door for anything." Rose's eyes went wide. "Where are you going?" "Just to check." "Martha, I'll be fine." She wasn't sure if that was true, but she said it anyway. Outside, the cold hit her like a wall. The wind cut through her coat like it wasn't even there. She could barely see 10 feet in front of her through the blowing snow. But the tracks were there. Big ones. Paw prints the size of her fist pressed deep into the snow, and they circled the cabin. Whatever it was, it had been here a while. Watching. Waiting. Martha's hands tightened on the rifle. She scanned the tree line, looking for movement. Saw nothing but white and gray and the skeletal shadows of trees. Then she heard it. A low growl. Not close, but not far either. Her breath caught. "Get out of here," she shouted into the wind. The growl came again, closer this time. Martha raised the rifle, her hands shaking. She couldn't see it. Couldn't see anything except snow and shadows and the dark spaces between the trees. "I said get out of here." Silence. Then movement. A shape, low, massive, gray, slipped between the trees and disappeared. Martha stood there for another 5 minutes, her heart pounding, her finger on the trigger. But the wolf, or whatever it was, didn't come back. When she finally went inside, Eli was waiting by the door. "Did you see it?" he asked. "Yeah. What was it?" "Wolf, big one." Eli's face went pale. "What do we do?" "Keep the fire going, keep the door shut, and don't go outside alone." "What if it comes back?" "Then I shoot it." Eli looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she meant it. She did. That night, none of them slept. They sat by the fire, the rifle across Martha's lap, listening to the wind and waiting for the sound of claws on wood. It never came, but the fear didn't leave. On the 5th day, Coulter still wasn't back. Martha tried not to panic, tried to tell herself he was just delayed, that the storm had slowed him down, that he'd be back any minute. But deep down, she knew. Something had gone wrong. "We need to go look for him," Eli said. "No. Martha. He told us to stay here. He also said if he wasn't back in 5 days, we should head down the mountain. It's only been 5 days. We give him 1 more. And if he's not back tomorrow?" Martha didn't answer, because she didn't know. Didn't know if she was strong enough to lead 2 kids down a mountain in the middle of winter. Didn't know if they'd even make it halfway before the cold or the wolves or the mountain itself killed them. But she couldn't say that out loud. So she just said, "We'll figure it out." Eli didn't look convinced. Neither was she. That afternoon, the food ran out completely. Not almost out, not down to scraps. Out. Martha stared at the empty pot, her stomach twisting. They had nothing left. No flour, no beans, no salt. Nothing. "What do we do?" Rose asked quietly. Martha forced a smile. "We manage." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we will." It was becoming her default answer, and it was starting to ring hollow. That night, Martha couldn't stop shaking. Not from the cold, though that was part of it. From hunger, from fear, from the crushing weight of knowing that if Coulter didn't come back tomorrow, they were going to die up here. All of them. Slow and hungry and frozen. She climbed down from the loft and sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Eli came down a few minutes later. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No." He sat down beside her. "Me neither." They sat in silence for a while. Then Eli said, "I'm scared." Martha looked at him, surprised. It was the first time he'd admitted it out loud. "Me too," she said. "You think he's dead?" Martha wanted to lie, wanted to tell him that Coulter was fine, that he'd be back tomorrow with food and supplies and everything would be okay, but she couldn't. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I hope not." "But you think he might be?" "Yeah, I think he might be." Eli nodded slowly. "What do we do if he is?" "We survive." "How?" Martha looked at him, this boy who was trying so hard to be a man, who was carrying weight no kid should have to carry. "Together," she said. "We survive together." Eli's eyes were wet. "I don't know if I can." "You can. You're stronger than you think." "I'm not." "You are. You've been keeping this place running just as much as I have. You've been taking care of Rose. I've been scared out of my mind," Eli interrupted. "Every single day. I wake up scared, go to bed scared, spend every minute in between scared. And I hate it." Martha reached out and took his hand. "Being scared doesn't make you weak, Eli. It makes you human." "Coulter's never scared." "Yes, he is. He's just better at hiding it." Eli looked at her. "You really think so?" "I know so." They sat there together, holding hands, staring at the fire. And for a little while, the fear felt a little less heavy. The sixth day dawned clear and brutally cold. Martha woke to silence. The wind had stopped. The storm had passed. And Coulter still wasn't back. She climbed down from the loft and looked out the window. The world outside was white and still and dead. No movement. No sound. Nothing. Eli came down a few minutes later. "We're leaving, aren't we?" Martha turned to look at him. "Yeah, we are." "When?" "Today. As soon as we can get packed." Eli nodded. "What do we take?" "Everything we can carry. Blankets, the rifle, anything that'll keep us warm or alive." "What about food?" Martha's stomach twisted. "There is no food." "Then how?" "We move fast. We don't stop. We make it to Red Hollow before we starve." Eli stared at her. "You think we can?" "We have to." Rose appeared at the top of the ladder, her face pale. "We're leaving Coulter?" Martha's chest cracked. "We're not leaving him. "Yes, we are," Rose said quietly. "That's what leaving means." "Rose, he came back for us. When we were in the mountains and Mama and Papa died, he came back for us. He didn't have to, but he did. And now we're just going to leave him?" Martha climbed the ladder and knelt beside her. "We don't have a choice, honey. There's always a choice. Not this time." Rose's face twisted. "I hate this. I hate all of it." "I know. It's not fair." "No, it's not." Rose started crying. Martha pulled her close and held her while she broke. And she wished, more than anything, that she had an answer that would make this okay. But she didn't. They spent the morning packing. It wasn't much. A few blankets, the rifle and ammunition, a pot, some rope, their coats, and whatever warm clothes they had left. Everything else, the furniture, the tools, the cabin itself, they left behind. Martha took one last look around, at the fireplace where they'd huddled together on the coldest nights, at the table where they'd eaten thin soup and pretended it was enough, at the loft where Rose had finally learned to sleep without nightmares. This place had been hard, brutal, unforgiving, but it had also been theirs, and now they were walking away. "Ready?" Eli asked. Martha nodded. "Yeah." They stepped outside into the cold. The snow was waist-deep in places. The path down the mountain was barely visible. The sun was already starting to sink toward the horizon. They had maybe 6 hours of daylight left. It would take at least 8 to reach Red Hollow, maybe 10 if the snow was bad. But they didn't have a choice, so they started walking. The first hour was the hardest. The snow fought them with every step. Rose fell twice. Eli had to carry her the second time, his face red with effort. Martha's legs burned, her lungs screamed, her hands were so cold she couldn't feel them anymore. But she kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and she wasn't ready to die yet. By the second hour, Rose couldn't walk anymore. Eli tried to carry her, but he was too weak, too tired. So Martha took over. She lifted Rose onto her back, feeling the girl's arms wrap around her neck, and kept walking. Every step was agony. Her legs shook, her back screamed, her breath came in short, sharp gasps that burned her throat. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because Rose was counting on her. They both were. By the third hour, Martha's vision started to blur. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. "Martha," Eli said quietly, "you need to rest." "Can't." "You have to." "If I stop, I won't get back up." "Then let me carry her." "You can't." "I can, just for a little while." Martha stopped. Let Eli take Rose. Watched him struggle under the weight, but refused to give up. He was stronger than she'd thought. Stronger than he knew. They kept walking. By the fourth hour, the sun was sinking fast. The temperature dropped. The shadows grew longer. And Martha realized they weren't going to make it to Red Hollow before dark. "We need to find shelter," she said. Eli looked around. "There's nothing out here." "There has to be something." "Martha, look harder." Eli scanned the tree line. Then he pointed. "There, that outcropping. Might block the wind." It wasn't much. Just a shelf of rock jutting out from the mountainside, barely big enough for the three of them. But it was something. They huddled together under the rock, sharing the blankets, trying to stay warm. Rose was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Eli's lips were turning blue. And Martha was so tired she could barely think. "We're going to die out here, aren't we?" Rose whispered. "No," Martha said. "We're not." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let us." It was a stupid thing to say. Martha knew that, knew she didn't have any control over whether they lived or died, but she said it anyway, because sometimes all you had was stubbornness. And right now, that was enough. They spent the night huddled under that rock, shivering and hungry and terrified. None of them slept. They just waited for the sun to come up. And when it finally did, they started walking again. By midday, Rose couldn't even hold her head up. Eli was stumbling every few steps. And Martha was running on nothing but fumes and fear. But she kept moving. Because what else was there to do? Then Eli stopped. "What?" Martha asked. "Listen." She listened and heard it. Voices. Faint, distant, but real. "Someone's out there," Eli said. Martha's heart jumped. "Hello?" she shouted. "Help! We need help!" The voices got louder, closer. Then she saw them. 3 men on horseback pushing through the snow, and at the front, Coulter, alive. Battered and half-frozen, his face pale and his leg wrapped in bloody bandages, but alive. Martha's legs gave out. She dropped to her knees in the snow, still holding Rose, and started crying. Coulter climbed down from his horse, wincing with every movement, and limped toward her. "Martha," he said, his voice rough. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You're alive." "Barely." "What happened?" "Fell. Broke my leg in 3 places. Took me 2 days just to crawl back to the road." He knelt down beside her, grimacing in pain, and looked at Rose and Eli. "You shouldn't have left the cabin," he said. "We ran out of food," Martha said. "We didn't have a choice." Coulter's jaw tightened. "I should have been back sooner. You're here now. That's what matters." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched her face. "You saved them," he said quietly. "You got them this far." "We're not safe yet." "No, but we will be." The men with Coulter helped them onto the horses. One of them, a grizzled man named Dutch, took Rose. Another took Eli. Coulter pulled Martha up onto his horse, even though his leg was clearly killing him. "You should let someone else," Martha started. "I got you," Coulter said firmly. "Just hold on." So she did, and together they rode down the mountain toward Red Hollow. They reached Red Hollow just after dark. Martha barely remembered the ride. Just fragments. The rhythm of the horse beneath her, Coulter's arm tight around her waist, the lights of town appearing through the trees like small, impossible stars. When they finally stopped in front of the doctor's house, she couldn't get down on her own. Her legs wouldn't work. Everything hurt. Dutch lifted her off the horse like she weighed nothing and carried her inside. The doctor, a thin man named Porter with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, took one look at all of them and started barking orders. "Get them by the fire, all of them, And someone boil water, lots of it. Martha was deposited into a chair. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. A cup of something hot was pressed into her hands. She drank it without tasting it. Across the room, Porter was examining Coulter's leg, his face grim. "How long's it been broken?" he asked. 6 days, Coulter said through gritted teeth. "And you rode down the mountain on it?" "Didn't have much choice." Porter shook his head. "You're lucky you didn't lose the leg entirely. As it is, you're looking at months of healing, maybe longer." "How long before I can walk?" "Walk? 2 months, maybe 3. Work? 4 to 6 if you're careful, and if you're not, I'll be careful." Porter didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue, just started cleaning the wound while Coulter sat there, jaw clenched, not making a sound. Martha watched him from across the room and felt something crack open in her chest. This man had crawled down a mountain with a shattered leg to get them help, had ridden back up that same mountain, broken and bleeding, to find them. And now he was sitting there like it was nothing, like he hadn't just done the impossible. "You're staring," Rose whispered beside her. Martha blinked. "What?" At Coulter. "You're staring." "I'm just making sure he's all right." Rose gave her a look that was far too knowing for a 9-year-old. "Sure you are." Before Martha could respond, Eli appeared with bowls of soup, real soup, with meat and vegetables and bread on the side. Martha's stomach twisted at the sight of it. She wanted to eat slowly, wanted to be dignified about it. She wasn't. None of them were. They ate like animals, fast and desperate and shameless. And when they were done, Porter's wife brought more. By the time Martha finally felt full, she was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. "There's rooms upstairs," Porter's wife said gently. "You and the girl can take the one on the left. The boy can have the one on the right." "What about Coulter?" Martha asked. "He'll stay down here. I need to keep an eye on that leg." Martha wanted to argue, wanted to stay with him, make sure he was all right, but her body had other ideas. She barely made it up the stairs before her legs gave out. Rose helped her to the bed, and the moment Martha's head hit the pillow, she was gone. She slept for 16 hours straight. When she finally woke, the sun was high and the house was quiet. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, didn't recognize the ceiling or the softness of the mattress beneath her. Then it all came back. The mountain, the cold, the walk that had nearly killed them, Coulter. She sat up too fast and immediately regretted it. Her head spun. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. But she was alive. They all were. She found Rose downstairs in the kitchen, eating eggs and bacon like she'd never seen food before. "Morning," Porter's wife said warmly. "Or afternoon, I suppose. You hungry?" Martha's stomach answered before she could. She ate 2 plates of food and drank 3 cups of coffee. And when she was done, she asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since she woke up. "Where's Coulter?" "Out back. He's been up since dawn. He should be resting." "I told him that. He didn't listen." Martha found him sitting on the back porch, his broken leg propped up on a crate, staring out at the mountains. "You're supposed to be in bed," she said. He didn't turn around. "Got tired of lying down. Porter said you need to rest." "I've been resting for 6 days. I'm done." Martha sat down beside him. "You almost died up there." "But I didn't." "Coulter, drop it, Martha." They sat in silence for a while. Then Coulter said, "I'm sorry." Martha blinked. "For what?" "For leaving you alone up there, for getting hurt, for making you—" He stopped, looked away. "For all of it. You don't have anything to apologize for." "Yeah, I do. I promised I'd take care of you, take care of them. And instead, I nearly got all of you killed." Martha reached out and took his hand. "You saved us. If you hadn't gone down that mountain when you did, we would have starved. And if you hadn't come back when you did, we would have frozen. You were doing fine on your own. We were dying on our own." Coulter finally looked at her. "You got them halfway down that mountain, Martha. Carried Rose on your back. Kept Eli moving when he wanted to give up. You think that's nothing? It's not the same as— It's exactly the same. You did what you had to do to keep them alive, same as me." Martha's throat tightened. "I was so scared." "I know. I didn't think I could do it." "But you did. Only because I didn't have a choice." Coulter squeezed her hand. "That's what courage is, Martha. Doing the thing you're scared of because there's no other option." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache. Respect, not pity, not obligation. Respect. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me. Coulter frowned. I've always seen you. No. You've looked at me. That's different. He didn't answer, just held her hand and stared back out at the mountains. And for the first time since Martha had married him, she felt like maybe, just maybe, this thing between them could be more than just survival. They stayed in Red Hollow for 3 weeks. Porter wouldn't let Coulter leave until the leg had started healing properly. And even then, he made it clear that going back up the mountain was a terrible idea. You need at least another month of rest, Porter said. Preferably 2. Can't afford 2 months, Coulter said. You can't afford to cripple yourself permanently either. I'll manage, Porter sighed and looked at Martha. Talk some sense into him. But Martha knew better than to try. Coulter had already made up his mind. So instead, she focused on the kids. Eli had been withdrawn since they'd gotten to town, quiet in a way that wasn't like him. He spent most of his time outside, chopping wood for Porter or mucking out stables for the livery, doing anything that kept him busy. Martha found him one afternoon sitting behind the barn, his head in his hands. You all right? She asked. He didn't look up. Yeah. You don't look all right? I'm fine. Martha sat down beside him. You know you can talk to me, right? Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I thought we were going to die up there. I know. And I couldn't do anything about it. Couldn't hunt. Couldn't fix Coulter's leg. Couldn't even keep Rose from crying. I was just useless. Martha's chest tightened. You weren't useless, Eli. Yes, I was. You did everything. You and Coulter. I just stood there and watched. That's not true. It is. Eli, look at me. He finally lifted his head. You kept that cabin running when Coulter left, Martha said firmly. You gathered wood. You kept the fire going. You helped me carry Rose when I couldn't do it alone. You think that's nothing? It's not enough. It was everything. Eli's eyes were wet. I should have been stronger. You were strong. You are strong. And one day you're going to be even stronger. But right now you're 14, and that's okay. It doesn't feel okay. I know, but it is. Eli wiped his eyes roughly. Thanks, Martha. She pulled him into a hug. He stiffened for a second, then hugged her back. And when he finally pulled away, he looked a little less broken. Rose was different. She hadn't cried since they'd left the mountain. Hadn't talked much either. Just went through the days quiet and careful, like she was afraid that if she made too much noise, everything would fall apart again. Martha tried to draw her out, tried to get her to talk about what she was feeling, but Rose just shook her head and said she was fine. Until one night, Martha found her sitting by the window in their room, staring out at the stars. Can't sleep? Martha asked. Rose shook her head. Martha sat down beside her. What are you thinking about? Home? The cabin? No, before that, when Mama and Papa were still alive. Martha's chest ached. What was it like? Rose was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Safe. Safe how? I don't know. It just was. Mama would sing while she cooked. Papa would tell stories by the fire, and I'd sit there and listen and know that nothing bad was going to happen. Her voice broke. And then it did. And now I don't feel safe anywhere. Martha pulled her close. I know, honey. Do you think it ever goes away? The scared? I don't know, but I think maybe it gets quieter. When? I don't know that either. Rose leaned into her. I'm glad you're here, Martha. Martha's throat tightened. Me too. Do you think we'll be okay? All of us? Martha thought about it, thought about the mountain and the cold and everything they'd been through. Yeah, she said, I think we will. And for the first time, she actually believed it. During those 3 weeks in Red Hollow, something else happened that Martha didn't expect. The town noticed her, not in the mocking, cruel way they had before, in a different way. Women who'd never spoken to her before stopped her on the street to ask how she was doing. Men tipped their hats when she walked by. Even the saloon owner, a rough man named Briggs, who'd never given her the time of day, pulled her aside one afternoon. Heard what you did up there, he said, getting those kids down the mountain, taking care of Rains when he couldn't take care of himself. Martha shifted uncomfortably. I just did what needed doing. That's more than most people would have done. He paused. You need anything while you're in town, you let me know. It was the first time anyone in Red Hollow had offered to help her, the first time anyone had treated her like she mattered. Martha didn't know what to do with it. She told Coulter about it that evening. Town's treating me different, she said. How so? Like I don't know. Like I'm somebody. Coulter looked at her. You are somebody. I wasn't, not before. Yes, you were. They just didn't see it. And now they do. Now they have to. Martha thought about that. Does it bother you that they only see me now because of what happened? Coulter shook his head. No, because it doesn't matter when they saw it. What matters is that you always were this person, even when nobody was looking. Martha felt her eyes burn. How do you always know the right thing to say? I don't. Most of the time I say the wrong thing, but every once in a while I get lucky. She smiled and leaned against him. And they sat there together, watching the sun set over the mountains. By the end of the third week, Coulter was walking again. Not well. He still limped badly and his face went white whenever he put too much weight on the leg. But he could move, and that was enough. We leave tomorrow, he announced at dinner. Porter nearly choked on his soup. Tomorrow? Are you insane? Probably. Coulter, your leg is barely healed. It's healed enough. For what? Killing yourself on that mountain? Coulter's jaw tightened. We can't stay here forever. You can stay another few weeks. And then what? Wait for winter to come back? Wait until the passes are snowed in and we're stuck down here? Better stuck down here than dead up there. Maybe. But I made a promise to those kids. Told them I'd give them a home. And I aim to keep it. Porter looked at Martha. And you're okay with this? Martha hesitated. She wasn't okay with it. Wasn't okay with going back to that cabin, back to the cold and the hunger and the endless, brutal work. But she also knew Coulter was right. They couldn't stay in Red Hollow forever. Eventually, they'd run out of money or Porter's patience, and then they'd be back where they started. At least on the mountain, they had a chance. Yeah, she said finally. I'm okay with it. Porter threw up his hands. You're all crazy. Maybe they were, but they left the next morning anyway. The trip back up the mountain took twice as long as it should have. Coulter couldn't ride for more than an hour without his leg giving out. They had to stop every few miles to let him rest. Eli kept looking back at Red Hollow like he was trying to memorize it, like he thought he might never see it again. Rose didn't look back at all, just stared straight ahead, her face pale and set. And Martha tried not to think about what they were walking into, tried not to remember how close they'd come to dying up there, tried not to wonder if they'd be luckier this time. When they finally reached the cabin, it looked smaller than Martha remembered, colder, more fragile, like a strong wind could knock it over. But it was still standing, and that was something. They unloaded the supplies Coulter had bought in town: flour, beans, salt, coffee, ammunition, and 3 chickens that squawked indignantly the entire way up. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had before. That night, they ate a real meal for the first time in months. Chicken stew with vegetables and fresh bread. Nobody spoke. They just ate. The only sound, the crackling of the fire and the scrape of spoons against bowls. When they were done, Eli looked at Coulter. What happens now? He asked. Coulter leaned back in his chair, his bad legs stretched out in front of him. Now, we get ready. For what? Winter. It's coming back. Always does. And when it does, we're gonna be ready this time. How? We chop twice as much wood, store twice as much food, fix every crack in these walls, and we don't take anything for granted. Eli nodded slowly. What can I do? Everything. I can't work like I used to. Not with this leg, so I'm going to need you to step up. Think you can do that? Eli sat up straighter. Yeah, I can do that. Good. Coulter turned to Martha. You too. Me? You've been running this place for weeks. No reason to stop now. Martha blinked. I don't know how to... You'll figure it out. You always do. It wasn't a compliment, just a statement of fact, but it felt like one anyway. Over the next few weeks, they worked. Eli chopped wood until his hands blistered. Then he wrapped them and kept chopping. Martha patched the roof, stuffed rags into the cracks in the walls, and built a second coop for the chickens. Rose helped where she could, gathering pine needles for kindling, collecting eggs, keeping the fire fed. And Coulter did what he could with a broken leg. Sharpened tools, mended harnesses, taught Eli how to set traps and skin rabbits. It wasn't enough. They all knew it, but it was better than before. One afternoon, while Martha was repairing a section of the roof, she slipped. Her foot caught on a loose board and she fell hard, landing on her back in the dirt below. The wind knocked out of her. For a few seconds, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then Coulter was there, kneeling beside her, his face pale. "Martha, Martha, can you hear me?" She nodded, gasping for air. "Don't move, just breathe." She did. Slow, painful breaths that felt like knives in her chest. Coulter ran his hands over her arms, her legs, checking for breaks. "Anything hurt bad?" "Everything," she managed. "Can you sit up?" She tried. Failed. Tried again. Coulter helped her, his hands gentle despite their roughness. "You could have broken your neck," he said quietly. "But I didn't." "You could have." Martha looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. Fear. Real, raw fear. "I'm all right," she said. "This time." "What about next time?" "There won't be a next time." "You don't know that." His voice cracked. "I can't lose you, Martha." The words hung in the air between them. Martha stared at him, her heart pounding. "Coulter!" "I mean it. I know I ain't said it before. No, I should have. But I need you to know. I can't lose you." Martha's eyes burned. "You won't." "You don't know that." "Neither do you." Coulter's jaw worked. "I'm trying to tell you something here." "Then tell me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You matter to me. More than I thought anyone ever would, again." Martha felt something break open in her chest. "You matter to me, too." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Coulter helped her to her feet, and they stood there in the dirt, looking at each other like they were seeing something for the first time. Then he kissed her. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't practiced. Their teeth clicked and Martha's back hurt, and Coulter's leg was shaking from holding his weight. But it was real. And when they pulled apart, Martha was smiling. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Martha found Coulter sitting by the fire, staring at the flames. "Your leg bothering you?" she asked. "Always." She sat down across from him. "You should rest more." "Can't. Too much to do." "Coulter, I know what you're going to say, Martha, but I can't just sit around while you and Eli do all the work. You're healing. That is work." He shook his head. "It's not the same." "Yes, it is." Coulter looked at her, his face hard. "I'm supposed to protect you, supposed to provide, and instead You're doing the best you can. It's not good enough. It is for me." Coulter's jaw worked. "Why? Why what? Why do you stay? You could have left a dozen times by now, gone back to town, found a life that doesn't involve freezing to death on a mountain. But you're still here. Why?" Martha thought about it, thought about all the reasons she'd told herself over the weeks. The kids, the promise, the lack of options. But when she answered, she told him the truth. "Because I matter here," she said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I matter." Coulter stared at her. "You always mattered." "No, I was always there. That's different." "Martha." "In town, I was invisible, just the fat woman in the kitchen. Nobody saw me. Nobody needed me. Nobody cared if I lived or died." Her voice cracked. "But here, if I don't chop wood, we freeze. If I don't cook, we starve. If I don't show up, people notice. And that matters." Coulter was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You matter to me." Martha's breath caught. "What?" "You matter to me," he repeated. "More than I thought anyone ever would again." "Coulter, I ain't good with words, Martha. Never have been. But you need to know that. You matter. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are." Martha felt tears burn her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Don't have to say anything." "Yes, I do, because—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "Because you matter to me too." Coulter looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, wincing as his leg protested. and crossed to her side of the fire. He held out his hand. Martha took it. And for the first time since they'd married, Coulter pulled her close and held her. Not out of obligation, not out of necessity, just because he wanted to. The first snow came 3 weeks later. Not the brutal killing kind, just a light dusting that made the world look clean and new. Rose stood at the window watching it fall. "It's pretty," she said quietly. Eli looked up from where he was repairing a harness. "Yeah, it is." Martha glanced at Coulter. He was watching the kids, his face unreadable. "You all right?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." And for the first time since winter had started, Martha believed they might actually make it through. But the mountain wasn't done with them yet. 2 days later, Eli went out to check the traps and didn't come back. An hour passed. Then 2. Coulter tried to stand, but his leg buckled. "Something's wrong." "He probably just went farther than usual," Martha said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "He knows better. Maybe he—" "Martha, something's wrong." She grabbed the rifle. "I'll go." "Not alone, you won't. You can't walk that far. Watch me." Coulter grabbed his crutch and limped toward the door. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to stay put, but she didn't, because she knew he wouldn't listen. They found Eli a mile from the cabin. He was lying in the snow, his leg twisted at a wrong angle, his face white with pain. "Fell," he gasped, "stepped wrong and—" "Don't talk," Coulter said, kneeling beside him. "Just breathe." He examined the leg, his face grim. "It's broken." Martha's stomach dropped. "How bad?" "Bad enough." That word again. They got Eli back to the cabin, Coulter and Martha supporting him on either side, Rose running ahead to get the fire going. By the time they laid him down, Eli was barely conscious. Coulter set the leg as best he could while Martha held Eli down and Rose stood in the corner, crying. When it was done, Coulter sat back, his own leg throbbing, his face gray. "He'll be all right," he said, "but he's going to be down for a while." Martha looked at him, at his broken leg, at Eli's broken leg, at Rose's terrified face, and realized that they were right back where they'd started. Broken, scared, barely hanging on. But this time, something was different. This time, they weren't alone. Martha became everything that winter. She was the one who chopped wood when both Coulter and Eli couldn't walk. She was the one who checked the traps, hauled water, fed the chickens, cooked the meals, and kept the fire burning through nights so cold the walls cracked. She didn't ask for help, didn't complain, just did what needed to be done, because the alternative was watching them all die. Rose tried to help where she could, but she was too small for most of the work, too weak. So she did what she could, kept Eli company while he healed, read to him from the one book they had, made sure he ate even when he didn't want to. And Coulter watched Martha work herself to the bone and hated every second of it. "You need to rest," he said one night after she'd finally sat down. "I'm fine." "You're not. You're going to kill yourself. Better me than all of us." "Martha." "Don't, Coulter. Just don't." She was too tired to argue, too tired to care. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her hands were so raw they bled when she gripped the axe. Her back felt like it might snap in half, but she couldn't stop, because the moment she stopped, everything would fall apart. Coulter reached out and took her hand. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not being able to help. For making you carry all of this alone." Martha looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the guilt etched into every line of his face. "You're healing," she said quietly. "That's what you're supposed to be doing." "It's not enough." "It has to be." They sat in silence for a while, Martha's hand in his. Then Coulter said, "When I can walk again, I'm going to make this right." "There's nothing to make right." "Yes, there is. I promised you—" "You promised me you'd be kind," Martha interrupted. "And you have been. That's enough." Coulter's throat worked. "Is it?" Martha squeezed his hand. "Yeah, it is." By the second week of Eli's recovery, the boy was climbing the walls. "I should be out there," he said for the 100th time. "Not sitting here like some useless—" "You're not useless," Rose said sharply. "You're hurt. I can still do things." "Like what? Hop around on one leg and fall in a ditch?" "I wouldn't fall." "You fell last time." Eli glared at her. That was different. How? It just was. Martha walked in carrying an armload of wood and dropped it by the fire. She was covered in snow, her face red from the cold, her breath coming in short gasps. Eli watched her and felt his chest tighten with shame. "Martha," he said quietly. She looked up. "Yeah? I'm sorry." "For what?" "For being useless. For making you do everything." Martha crossed the room and sat down beside him. "You're not useless, Eli. You're hurt. There's a difference." "Doesn't feel like it." "I know, but it's true." She paused. "You know what you can do. You can heal. You can get stronger. And when you're ready, you can help again. But right now your job is to let that leg mend. You understand?" Eli nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah. Good." She stood up and went back to work, and Eli watched her go, wondering how someone could be that strong and still pretend she wasn't. The third week brought the worst storm they'd seen yet. It came without warning, just a wall of white that swallowed the world whole. The wind screamed so loud it drowned out everything else. The snow piled up so fast Martha had to dig out the door every few hours just to keep it from freezing shut. And the cold. The cold was a living thing, vicious and hungry and relentless. Martha fed the fire constantly, burning through wood faster than she could replace it. She wrapped everyone in every blanket they had, boiled water and made them drink it to keep warm from the inside out. But it wasn't enough. On the second night of the storm, Rose started shivering and couldn't stop. Martha pulled her close, wrapped her in blankets, held her tight, but the shivering didn't stop. "Coulter," Martha said quietly. He limped over, his face going pale when he saw Rose. "She's too cold," Martha said. "I know." "What do we do?" Coulter looked around the cabin, at the fire that was barely keeping them alive, at Eli huddled in his bedroll, trying to stay warm, at the walls that creaked and groaned under the weight of the storm. "We share heat," he said finally. "All of us. Together." They pulled the bedrolls down from the loft and arranged them by the fire. Then they all climbed in, Martha, Rose, Eli, and Coulter, pressed together in one shivering mass. It was awkward, uncomfortable, but it worked. Slowly, Rose's shivering eased, her breathing steadied, and eventually she fell asleep. Martha lay there in the dark, listening to the storm rage outside, feeling Coulter's warmth against her back, and Rose's small body curled against her chest. And she thought about how strange this was. This life. This family. None of it had been chosen, not really. It had just happened. But somewhere along the way it had become real. And now, lying here in the dark with these three people who'd started as strangers, Martha realized something. She loved them. Not in some grand, dramatic way, just in the quiet, everyday way that came from surviving together, from choosing each other over and over again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "You still awake?" Coulter whispered. "Yeah." "You all right?" Martha thought about it, thought about everything they'd been through, everything they'd lost, everything they'd barely survived. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think I am." Coulter's arm tightened around her waist. "Good." And in that moment, with the storm trying to kill them and the cold pressing in from all sides, Martha felt safer than she'd ever felt in her life. The storm finally broke on the fourth day. Martha stepped outside into a world transformed. The snow was so deep it reached her waist. The trees were buried. The sky was clear and brutally blue. And the silence was absolute. She stood there for a long moment, just breathing, just being. Then she grabbed the shovel and started digging. It took her 3 hours to clear a path to the stable, another 2 to dig out enough wood to keep the fire going. By the time she came back inside, she was shaking with exhaustion. But the fire was burning, the cabin was warm, and everyone was alive. That was enough. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to shift. Eli's leg healed enough that he could walk with a crutch. He started helping with the small things, feeding the fire, cooking simple meals, keeping Rose entertained. Coulter's leg got stronger, not all the way, but enough that he could move around without wincing every step. And Martha started to realize she couldn't do this alone anymore. She'd been pushing herself too hard for too long. Her body was breaking down. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd lost so much weight her clothes hung off her like rags. One morning, she woke up and couldn't get out of bed. Just couldn't. Her body refused to move. Coulter found her there, staring at the ceiling, tears running down her face. "Martha? I can't," she whispered. "I can't do it anymore." He sat down beside her. "Okay. I'm sorry. I know we need—" "Martha, stop." She looked at him. "You've been carrying this family on your back for 2 months," Coulter said quietly. "You've done more than anyone should ever have to do. And now you need to rest. So rest." "But the wood, I'll handle it." "You can't?" "I can. I will. You rest." Martha wanted to argue, wanted to say she'd be fine, that she just needed a minute, but she couldn't, because she wasn't fine, and she did need to rest. So she nodded and closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she let someone else take care of her. She slept for 2 days straight. When she finally woke, the cabin was warm, the fire was burning, and there was fresh soup waiting for her. Eli brought it up to her, his face serious. "Coulter made it," he said. "It's not as good as yours, but it's edible." Martha took a sip. It was thin and underseasoned, but it was warm. "It's perfect," she said. Eli smiled, a real smile. The first one she'd seen in weeks. "You scared us," he said quietly, "when you wouldn't wake up." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You needed it." He paused. "We should have been helping more. Should have seen you were wearing yourself out. You were hurt." "I know, but still." He looked away. "I don't want you to think you have to do everything alone. We're a family. That means we help each other." Martha felt her throat tighten. "When did you get so smart? Learned from the best." He stood up to leave, then stopped at the ladder. "Martha?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for everything." Then he was gone. And Martha sat there in the loft crying for the second time that week, but this time they were good tears. During the days that followed, something fundamental shifted in the cabin. Coulter took over the heavy work, pushing himself harder than he should have, his legs still not fully healed but strong enough to carry the weight. He chopped wood in the mornings, his breath coming out in white clouds, his jaw set against the pain. Eli, still using his crutch, managed the indoor tasks. He cooked meals that got better each day, fed the fire, and helped Rose with her chores. Rose became their scout, checking the weather, watching for animals near the cabin, collecting eggs from the chickens who'd somehow survived the brutal winter. And Martha learned to accept help. It was harder than doing everything herself had been, harder than chopping wood or hauling water or walking down a mountain with a child on her back, because accepting help meant admitting she wasn't invincible, meant trusting that the world wouldn't fall apart if she let go for a minute. But slowly, painfully, she learned. One afternoon, she came downstairs to find Coulter teaching Eli how to repair a broken harness. "You gotta thread it like this," Coulter was saying. "See? Under, over, pull tight." Eli tried, his tongue sticking out in concentration. "Like this?" "Yeah, just like that." Martha watched them from the doorway, these two broken men teaching each other how to fix broken things, and felt something warm spread through her chest. This was what family looked like, she realized. Not perfect people doing perfect things, just broken people trying their best to hold each other together. Spring came slowly that year, not in a rush of warmth and flowers, but in small, careful increments. A few degrees warmer each day, a little more sunlight, the sound of water running under the ice. And with it, something else shifted. The fear that had lived in the cabin all winter, the constant, gnawing terror that they wouldn't make it, started to fade. Not completely. It was still there, lurking in the corners, but it was quieter now. Manageable. One morning, Martha woke to the sound of birds. Real birds. Not just crows, but songbirds that meant spring was really, truly coming. She climbed down from the loft and found Coulter already awake, standing by the window. "You hear that?" he asked. "Yeah." "We made it." Martha stood beside him, looking out at the mountains. "Yeah, we did." Coulter turned to her. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have." "No, I couldn't." He took her hand. "You saved us, Martha. All of us." "We saved each other." "Maybe. But you started it." Martha looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not just respect anymore. Something deeper. Coulter, I love you, he said. The words hung in the air between them. Martha's heart stopped. What? I love you. I don't know when it happened, don't know how, but it did. And I needed you to know. Martha stared at him, her mind spinning. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Yes, I do, because... She stopped, swallowed hard. Because I love you too. Coulter's face softened. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't perfect. It was awkward and a little clumsy, and their noses bumped. But it was real, and that was all that mattered. When they finally pulled apart, Martha was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in as long as she could remember. What do we do now? She asked. Coulter thought about it. We keep going, keep building, keep surviving. That's it? That's everything. And he was right. Over the next few months, they worked to rebuild what the winter had broken. They expanded the cabin, added a second room so Eli and Rose could have their own space. Coulter and Eli worked side by side, measuring and cutting and hammering, their movements synchronized in a way that came from spending months learning each other's rhythms. Martha watched them work one afternoon, saw the way Coulter would pause to let Eli try something first, the way Eli would look to Coulter for approval when he got it right, and realized that Coulter had become the father Eli had lost, not by replacing the one who'd died, but by being there when it mattered. They planted a garden. It was small, and most of the seeds didn't take, but a few did. Martha spent hours on her knees in the dirt, coaxing life from the hard mountain soil, and found it oddly peaceful. Rose helped her, chattering about everything and nothing, her voice filling the silence in a way that made Martha's chest ache with something that felt like hope. You think these will really grow? Rose asked one day, staring at the tiny green shoots pushing through the earth. Some will, Martha said. Some won't. That's how it works. How do you know which ones? You don't. You just keep watering them all and hope for the best. Rose thought about that. That's kind of like us, isn't it? Martha looked at her. What do you mean? We didn't know if we'd make it through the winter, but we kept trying anyway. And some of us made it. All of us made it, honey. I know, but we're different now, changed. Like some parts of us didn't make it, even if we did. Martha pulled Rose close. That's the smartest thing I've heard in a long time. Really? Really. They sat there together in the dirt, surrounded by things that might grow or might not, and Martha thought that maybe Rose was right. They were different now, changed. But that didn't mean they were broken, just stronger in different places. They built a better chicken coop, added 2 more chickens that Coulter had bought on a rare trip down to Red Hollow. The chickens were mean and loud and laid eggs sporadically, but they were theirs. Slowly, painfully, the cabin started to feel less like a place they were surviving in and more like a place they were living in. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Martha stood outside and looked at what they'd built. It wasn't much. The cabin was still rough. The garden was still struggling. The mountains were still brutal and unforgiving. But it was theirs, and that meant something. Coulter came up beside her. His limp was barely noticeable now, though Martha knew it still hurt him on cold mornings. What are you thinking about? He asked. How different things are now. Better or worse? Martha thought about it. Thought about the woman she'd been when she'd first stepped into that saloon. Invisible. Forgotten. Worthless. And thought about the woman she was now. Scarred. Exhausted. Stronger than she'd ever imagined. Better, she said. Definitely better. Coulter smiled and took her hand. Inside the cabin, they could hear Rose laughing at something Eli said. And for the first time in her life, Martha felt like she'd found the thing everyone spent their whole lives looking for. A place to belong. But life on the mountain never stayed easy for long. 2 years passed. Good years, mostly. Hard work and simple pleasures. Eli grew taller than Coulter, his shoulders broadening, his voice deepening. Rose turned 12, all knees and elbows and questions. And then the sickness came. It started in Red Hollow, some fever that swept through town, killing the old and the very young. The town doctor, Porter, sent word up the mountain warning them to stay away. They did. But the sickness found them anyway. Rose fell ill first. It started with a cough, then a fever that wouldn't break. Martha sat with her day and night, pressing cool cloths to her burning forehead, forcing water between her cracked lips. Coulter and Eli watched from downstairs, helpless. "She gonna make it?" Eli asked quietly one night. Coulter didn't answer right away. "I don't know." "What do we do if she doesn't?" "We keep going, same as always." "I don't think I can." Coulter looked at him. "Yes, you can, because you have to." It was the same thing Martha had told herself 100 times, 1,000 times. You do it because you have to. Rose's fever broke on the 5th day. Martha was dozing in the chair beside her when she heard it, Rose's voice, weak but clear. "Martha?" Martha's eyes flew open. "I'm here, honey." "Am I dying?" "No, you're getting better." "It doesn't feel like it." "I know, but you are." Rose was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I saw Mama." Martha's chest tightened. "What?" "When the fever was real bad, I saw Mama. She was standing in a field of flowers and she looked happy." "What did she say?" "She said it wasn't my time yet, said I had to go back." Martha felt tears burn her eyes. "I'm glad you listened." "Me too." Rose fell asleep after that, her breathing finally even and calm, and Martha sat there in the dark, thanking whatever forces had brought her back. The years that followed weren't easy. There were more hard winters, more close calls, more moments where they thought they wouldn't make it, but they did, because they had each other. Eli grew into a man, strong and capable, with Coulter's toughness and Martha's heart. He met a girl in Red Hollow named Sarah, tough as nails and twice as smart, and brought her up the mountain one spring. "This is where I'm from," he told her, showing her the cabin. "This is my family." Sarah looked around at the rough cabin, the struggling garden, the mountains that surrounded them on all sides. Then she looked at Eli and said, "All right, let's build something." They were married that summer, built their own cabin a few miles down the mountain, and when their first child was born, a girl they named Martha, Eli brought her up to meet the woman she was named after. Martha held the baby in her arms and cried. "I never thought I'd see this," she said quietly. "See what?" Eli asked. "A future, for any of us." Eli smiled. "We wouldn't have one if it wasn't for you." "That's not true." "It is. You held us together when everything was falling apart. You taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays." Martha looked down at the baby in her arms, this tiny, perfect thing that existed because they'd survived, and felt something shift inside her. Maybe Eli was right. Maybe all of this, all the pain and the fear and the brutal, endless work, had been worth it. Rose grew up wild and fearless. She learned to hunt, to track, to survive on her own. But she never lost her softness, never lost the ability to see the good in people, even when they didn't see it themselves. She left when she was 17, joined a traveling medicine show that came through Red Hollow, and sent letters home twice a year telling them about all the places she'd seen. Martha kept every letter in a box under the bed, and every time a new one arrived, she'd read it to Coulter by the fire, and they'd imagine all the things Rose was doing in the world beyond their mountain. "You think she's happy?" Coulter asked once. "Yeah," Martha said. "I think she is. Good. That's all I ever wanted for her, for both of them, for all of us." And Coulter and Martha, they grew old together on that mountain. Their bodies broke down. Coulter's leg never fully healed, and by the time he was 50, he walked with a pronounced limp. Martha's hands became gnarled with arthritis, her back bent from years of hard work. But they never stopped choosing each other, every single day. They added to the cabin over the years, built a porch where they could sit in the evenings, expanded the garden until it actually produced enough to live on, got more chickens, a goat, and eventually a cow that Coulter named Bessie and treated like royalty. The mountain that had once tried to kill them became their home, not because it got easier, but because they got stronger. One winter evening, when they were both too old and too tired to do much of anything, they sat by the fire like they'd done 1,000 times before. Snow was falling outside. The fire crackled softly. The cabin was warm. Martha looked at Coulter, his hair white now, his face lined with years and weather and life. and asked the question she always asked. "Were you kind today?" Coulter looked at her, his wife, his partner, the woman who'd saved him in ways he still didn't fully understand.
"I tried," he said. It was the same answer he'd given for 20 years, but this time he did something different. He reached out and pulled her close, held her the way he'd wanted to hold her every day since that first winter, but had been too scared to try. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For choosing me, when nobody else would." Martha smiled. "Thank you for letting me." "I didn't let you. You just did it. Walked right into my life and refused to leave."
"Are you complaining?" "Never." They sat there together as the fire burned low and the snow fell outside. And Martha thought about the girl she'd been, overlooked, mocked, dismissed, and the woman she'd become, scarred, strong, loved. She'd never been smaller, but the world around her had grown, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Not that she'd changed to fit the world, but that she'd changed the world to fit her. Coulter died first. It happened on a Tuesday morning in late spring. He went out to check on Bessie, sat down to rest his leg, and just didn't get back up. Martha found him there an hour later, sitting against the fence, his face peaceful. She didn't cry. Not then. She just sat down beside him and held his hand until Eli arrived. They buried him on the hill overlooking the cabin in a spot where you could see the entire valley. Martha insisted on helping dig the grave, even though her hands could barely grip the shovel anymore. "He wouldn't want me to just stand there," she said when Eli tried to stop her. So they dug together, father and son, though not by blood, laying to rest the man who'd saved them both. At the funeral, Martha stood at the graveside and said the only words that mattered. "He was kind. Not perfect. Not easy, but kind." And that was enough. Eli and Sarah wanted Martha to come live with them after that. Their cabin was bigger now, with room for her, but Martha refused. "This is my home," she said. "I'm staying." "You can't live up here alone," Eli argued. "Why not? I've done harder things." "Martha, I'm staying, Eli. Don't ask again." So she stayed. Alone in the cabin she'd built with Coulter and the kids. Alone with the chickens and Bessie and the garden she still tended every morning. But she wasn't lonely, because Coulter was everywhere. In the wood he'd chopped. In the porch he'd built. In the careful way he'd mended every crack in the walls so the cold couldn't get in. He was in every corner of this place. And that was enough. Martha lived 5 more years after Coulter died. 5 years of slow mornings and simple work. 5 years of watching the seasons change from her porch. 5 years of letters from Rose and visits from Eli's growing family. She died the way she'd lived, on her own terms. One morning, she simply didn't wake up. Eli found her in bed, her hands folded on her chest, a small smile on her face. Like she'd been expecting it. Like she was ready. They buried her next to Coulter on the hill, in matching graves that faced the valley. And at her funeral, Eli stood before the small crowd. His wife, his children, neighbors from Red Hollow who'd known Martha in her last years, and told them a story. "When I was 14, he said, I thought I knew what strength looked like. Thought it was about being tough, being hard, not showing weakness." He paused, his voice thick. "Then I met Martha, and she showed me something different. Showed me that strength isn't about being the biggest or the toughest. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you don't think you can." He looked at the 2 graves side by side. These 2 people, they weren't perfect. They were broken and scared and had no idea what they were doing most of the time. But they showed up. They chose each other. They chose me and Rose when nobody else would. And they taught us that family isn't about being related. It's about who stays. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. After the funeral, as people were leaving, one of Eli's daughters, the youngest, barely 6 years old, tugged on his sleeve. "Papa?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Grandma Martha, was she a hero?" Eli thought about it. Thought about everything Martha had done, everything she'd survived, everything she'd built from nothing. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She was." "What kind of hero?" "The best kind. The kind nobody writes stories about. The kind who just shows up." The little girl thought about that. Then she said, "I want to be like her when I grow up."
Eli smiled through his tears. Me too, honey. Me too. Years passed.
The cabin stood for a long time after Martha died. Eli maintained it, couldn't bring himself to let it fall apart. His children played there. Then his grandchildren. They heard stories about the people who'd lived there, about the winter that nearly killed them, about the woman who'd walked down a mountain to save her family, about kindness in the hardest places. And slowly, those stories spread. Not through books or newspapers or anything official, just through the quiet way stories always spread. One person telling another, who tells another, until the truth gets mixed with legend and nobody knows where one ends and the other begins. In Red Hollow, people still talked about Martha Hale, about the woman nobody wanted who became the woman nobody forgot, about how she'd been invisible until the moment she decided not to be, about how strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just waking up and doing what needs to be done. Day after day after day. Until one day, you look around and realize you've built something worth keeping. The cabin eventually fell into disrepair. Eli couldn't maintain it forever. The roof caved in during a bad winter. The walls crumbled. The garden was reclaimed by the mountain. But the graves remained. 2 headstones on a hill, facing the valley, side by side, forever. Coulter reigns and Martha reigns. No dates, no flowery words, just their names. And underneath, carved into the stone by Eli's own hand, one word, kind. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not that they'd been perfect, not that they'd conquered the mountain, just that they'd been kind to each other when the world was cruel. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. The sun sets over the mountains the same way it did 100 years ago. The snow still falls, the wind still howls, the cold still kills. But on a hill overlooking a valley, 2 graves stand side by side. And if you sit there long enough, you can almost hear it. The echo of a question asked 1,000 times. Were you kind today? And the answer, always the same. I tried. In a world that measures worth by beauty and status and all the things that fade, 2 broken people proved something different. That the only thing that lasts is what we do for each other. The small kindnesses, the showing up, the refusal to give up on the people who matter. Martha Hale never became smaller, but the world around her grew to make room for someone who refused to disappear. And in the end, that's the only victory that matters. Not changing yourself to fit the world, but changing the world just by being in it.